The use of heavy explosive weapons, and what I mean by that is explosive weapons that project massive explosive force over a wide area. When we use these weapons in populated areas, this is a major cause of civilian harm and therefore a major humanitarian issue. We're witnessing this in recent conflicts and ongoing conflicts, such as, just to give a few examples, in Gaza, in Libya, in Syria, in Yemen. And as armed conflicts are increasingly being fought in populated areas, this is a major cause of concern, a major cause of civilian harm. Warfare is moving increasingly into populated areas, and the consequence of this is when belligerents are fighting each other, which is perfectly legitimate, and they're attacking each other's military targets, when they're doing so with weapon systems that were originally designed for use in open battlefields, that is, and have wide area effects, then there's a significant likelihood of harm to civilians and civilian structures surrounding the military objectives. The fact that the enemy is located in a populated area does not suspend or somehow limit the obligations of the attacking party to fully respect international humanitarian law. The prohibition of indiscriminate attacks, the rule of proportionality in attack, and the obligation to take all feasible precautions in the choice of means and methods of warfare. So the choice of means and methods of warfare are extremely important, and IHL is very demanding in this respect when armed conflict is fought in populated areas. We believe existing law should be able to protect civilians adequately in populated areas, but there are serious questions about whether existing law is indeed being appropriately interpreted and applied. Some even question whether existing law is sufficient and whether there's a need for new standard and rules. But be that as it may, there's a need now for dialogue. We want to have this dialogue with states, with parties to armed conflicts, to understand how they are in their military policies and practices applying the rules prohibiting indiscriminate attacks, requiring proportionality in attack, precautions in their choice of means and methods of warfare, to ensure that civilians will be spared as far as possible. Now, critically, certain weapon systems, and these heavy explosive weapon systems that I spoke of, that is, explosive weapons that have wide area effects, there's a particular concern with these weapons in view of the rules of IHL. And this has led the ICRC to find, based on our observations of what is happening in current and ongoing armed conflicts, that use of such weapons entails a significant likelihood of indiscriminate effects. Heavy explosive weapons will typically damage critical civilian infrastructure. So it could be water supply networks, electrical supply networks, water plants, hospitals for that matter, which in turn will have an impact on civilian access to essential services, be it healthcare services, water supply, waste management services, etc. And all of this, especially when armed conflict is protracted, and we're seeing the ongoing protracted use of heavy explosive weapons for long periods of time in populated areas, all of this can result in addition, as I said, to the very high civilian casualties immediately, can result in civilians' experiences disease and other health problems, which will lead to further deaths. It could also lead to displacement. It often does lead to, it's a major cause of displacement. People will flee areas because of the lack of access to services essential to their survival. So all of these impacts, in our view, are foreseeable, or a lot of them are foreseeable, and because of that, we are asking parties to armed conflicts to avoid using explosive weapons with wide area effects in densely populated areas. When the enemy deliberately shields itself in and among the civilian population, this in and of itself is a major cause for concern under international humanitarian law. I mean, parties to armed conflicts must take precautions to protect the civilians in areas under their control and must avoid locating military objectives within or near a populated area. So that is an obligation of parties to armed conflict. Now, if the enemy violates that obligation, that does not suspend the obligations of the attacking party to respect IHL in all circumstances. And this is what is critical. When prosecuting armed conflicts in populated areas, attacking parties must at all times respect the prohibition on indiscriminate attacks, the rule of proportionality in attack, the prohibition of area bombardment, which is a type of indiscriminate attack, and all of these rules have an impact on their choice of means and methods of warfare, regardless of the behavior of their enemy. These rules must strictly be respected at all times. And this means they must adapt their means and methods of warfare. What we have found in the course of our research and in our dialogue with many armed forces is that there are unfortunately very few armed forces today, or at least it appears there are very few armed forces today that specifically train for urban warfare and specifically adopt procedures and rules of engagement that will limit the kinds of weapons that they can use in populated areas. And this is something we wish to have further discussions with armed forces about, because there is clearly and obviously, and we see this from the evidence in countless conflicts going on right now and being fought in populated areas, there is clearly a problem with the choice of certain means and methods of warfare in those environments.